Hey there! So last week I showed you how I made my now favorite half and half clothes, and I promised that this next video, so this one, will be about more patchwork style thing, and it is about this stuff actually. So I did it all in like the same week, this half and half clothes and this, but I just got overwhelmed by the amount of editing that I will have to make, and so I decided to split it. What I want to show you is how I organized making it and how I went about matching the stripes here, and these tips will apply to all the patchwork style clothes that you decide to make. The pattern that I chose was just these stripes, but you can cut your pattern also like this or diagonally or whatever comes to your mind. What I want to show you is like general tips on how to go about it, how I figure out is the best way to go about it. And I will use a pattern that I drafted myself. For me, it's like a perfect kind of knit top. But it's not a complicated pattern, so you can use whatever pattern you want. It doesn't have to be only like for tops. You can apply it to whatever pattern you choose, like a skirt or pants or whatever comes to your mind. But if you want to make something very similar to mine, then there's plenty of patterns, and I will leave some links below just in case you don't know where to go to find a turtleneck pattern. But yeah, that's it, and so without further ado, let's get started. So my idea was, like you've just seen, a turtleneck. The patchwork aspect of it that I wanted to make was black and white stripes. Also, I wanted the sleeves to be elbow length. For this project I chose 2 jersey fabric from my stash, black with panthers and white with tigers. Like I said, there are plenty of patterns similar to mine, like for example this one from Burda Easy 1/2021, or this one from Burda 12/2020, or there are many options on Etsy, or you can self-draft it like I did, for example based on this tutorial. Links will be in the description box below, and now that we have that sorted, let's jump into preparing the patchwork pattern. I didn't want to destroy my original pattern pieces, so the first thing that I did was I took a new piece of paper and traced all of them, starting with the front piece, and I marked my desired length, which was a couple of centimeters below my waist. Then I checked what was the length of the entire piece, and I decided to make 4 stripes. So I divided the length by 4 and I drew 4 dividing lines. I cut it out and I labeled every stripe like so: front 1, front 2, front 3, and so on. My pattern has seam allowance included, but wherever you make a new seam line, you have to add it, so near every line on both sides I wrote add seam allowance, to make sure I don't make any mistakes in that. Also, normally the front and back are cut on the fold, and every piece will be as well, so I will later mark where the folds should be, but I just wanted to tell you this now so you don't forget about it. It is very important to mark all these things, as when you cut all these pieces, they will be hard to recognize. Then I traced the back pattern piece, and I took my front piece, I just did, and marked all the stripes on both ends so they would match on the side seams. And I just connected them using a ruler, and then labeled them and added all the markings about seam allowance and also about the fold line that I mentioned before. I cut it out as well as the sleeve piece that I had already traced too. Then I marked the middle of my sleeve piece that will meet the shoulder seam. If you buy a pattern, it will probably already be marked. And now, because I wanted the stripes to at least more or less match on sleeves and the bodice, I measured how far from the shoulder seam the first stripe would end, and then I measured the same on the sleeve, starting on the middle point. Then, because the curve on the back piece is different, so the measurement would be different too, I did the same thing with the back piece. And now I could connect 2 points on the sleeve, and I had the first stripe. Second one, I just made the same width as on the bodice. I labeled all the pieces and added seam allowance marking as well. I also decided to mark the front side on each sleeve stripe, and it was the time to cut all the pieces apart. Now, because I wanted every other piece to be white and every other piece to be black, I started with the white fabric and I took every odd numbered pattern piece, so front 1, front 3, back 1, and so on. What was to be placed on the fold, I placed on the fold, and then sleeve pieces on 2 layers as well to get 2 mirrored pieces as you usually want for sleeves. The reason why I played around with them is I wanted to place them in a way that would make the pattern look nice. Also, I kept the pieces apart to make the room for seam allowance. I took my ruler and marked 1 cm seam allowance wherever it was supposed to be added. Then I cut it all out and I did not unpin the pattern pieces. I repeat, do not remove the pattern pieces from it because you will end up mixing it all up as some pieces look very similar, and no matter what pattern you make, it will be very hard to recognize. Just leave them pinned until it's sew time. Then I did the exact same thing with the black fabric and the even numbered pattern pieces. Side note, if you have a directional fabric like I do, remember to place the pattern pieces in the right direction too. You can just recognize it by the labels. Then I sorted everything back to front, back, and the sleeves. Okay, finally time for sewing. I decided to start with the back, so I took pieces labeled as back 1 and back 2. I decided to make exposed seam, so I put the wrong sides together and pinned and then sewed together on my serger. My fabrics are both jersey and I like working with it on my serger more than on my regular machine. Then I took piece 3 and put it together with what I just sewed, and then the last piece just the same, off camera to not bore you to death. The sleeves had 2 sides pinned together, so I took piece number 1 and 2, removed the pattern, and then I took 2 top pieces and sewed them and sewed both the sleeves, and then I did the same with the third piece, being careful not to accidentally mix them together. And after that I had 4 pieces just like I would if I used one fabric to make them. Also in the meantime I cut a rectangle for the turtleneck. So from now on I could work with it just like I would with sewing a regular turtleneck. The only thing to remember about is to match seams now. I started with sewing shoulder seams and they didn't have any additional seams, so nothing to worry about. Next thing was to sew the sleeves. I started by cutting whatever stuck out on the stripes borders so it was easier to match seams. Then I pinned the seam points first, and after that the rest of it. Luckily it seemed to match. As you can see, I like to use an excessive amount of pins here. I did not do the best job with matching these seams, but I decided not to worry and proceeded to the second sleeve. Then for the side seams, I started with matching armpit seams and then all my stripe seams as well, and sewed both sides all the way from sleeves to the bottom of the bodice. I thought my serger was in the frame, but it wasn't, sorry. And that is how I managed to match seams. Not great, not terrible. I think it's more acceptable with exposed seams. To finish the bottom edge and sleeves that you can see here, I decided to just overlock them to complete the exposed seam look. The last thing was to sew the turtleneck, and originally I sewed it on the shorter edge and then folded it in half and marked quarters. Then I marked quarters on the bodice as well and matched these points on both pieces and sewed them together, stretching the turtleneck. But the next day I changed my mind and I unpicked the neck seam and made a new turtleneck from just one layer and finished the top edge on an overlocker as well, just FYI. Then I hid all the thread tails in seams using a wool needle and it was done. So how do you think it turned out? Okay, so that's it. I hope you liked it and I hope you found it useful. If so, then make sure to click the thumbs up. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, then leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear about your experience, maybe your doubts, how to go about making something patchwork style. But also I would like to know tips that you have, because everything that I showed I figured out myself, so I'm not sure, maybe there is some better way. Just tell me. If you feel like sticking around and watch some more sewing or sometimes cross-stitching videos that I make, then consider subscribing. And I think that's it for today, so see you in the next one. Bye!